There are few things in a woodshop that hold as much history as an old workbench. This particular one, a stout maple behemoth, had clearly seen decades of honest work, but it had also seen a leaky roof. The corner nearest the wall was a sorry sight, a testament to the slow, silent destruction of water. The wood was no longer just stained, it was soft and spongy, a condition we often call punky. Poking it with an awl was like pushing a stick into a damp loaf of bread. The fibers had lost all their integrity, turning into a sad, pulpy mess that crumbled under the slightest pressure. This wasn't a surface issue. The rot ran deep into the thick top, threatening the very structure of the bench. When you face damage this severe, your first thought might be to reach for a can of standard wood filler or putty. Those products have their place, certainly. They are perfect for filling nail holes, minor cracks, or small cosmetic blemishes on otherwise healthy wood. However, for a problem like this, they are entirely insufficient. Think of them as a simple bandage for a superficial scrape. What this bench had was a deep, internal wound. A simple filler would only sit on the surface, a hard shell over a soft, decaying core. It would do nothing to restore the lost strength and would eventually crack and fall out as the rot continued its silent work beneath. My goal was not simply to patch up the ugly spots. That would be a disservice to the bench and the craftsmen who toiled over it before me. The objective was to save this piece of workshop history, to honor its long service by giving it a new life. But I wanted to do more than just restore it to its former glory. I aimed to make it even stronger than it was before, using a modern understanding of materials to solve an age-old problem. This wasn't about concealment. It was about deep, structural healing, turning the weakened, compromised wood into a solid, stable foundation for another century of projects, sawdust, and quiet satisfaction. This kind of restoration is a partnership between the old and the new. It's about respecting the character and story embedded in the grain, while employing techniques that weren't available to the original builder. The dings, the stains, the saw marks, those are chapters in the bench's story, and I had no intention of erasing them. But the rot was a sickness, a terminal diagnosis if left untreated. By intervening with a custom-formulated solution, the plan was to halt the decay and transform the rotted fibers into a new, composite material. The bench would keep its soul, but its body would be fortified, ready to stand strong against the rigors of daily use once more. To fight this deep-seated rot, a special potion was required. Store-bought wood hardeners are often thin, quick-drying acrylics that barely penetrate the surface. For this job, I needed something that would travel deep into the wood's vascular structure, soaking into every last punky fiber. My recipe is a simple but effective blend of pure tung oil and a 2-part low-viscosity epoxy resin. The tung oil acts as a carrier, thinning the resin and using its natural penetrating properties to pull the mixture deep into the wood. For this initial saturation, the ratio is key, about 2 parts tung oil to 1 part epoxy resin, plus its corresponding hardener. This creates a very thin, slow-curing liquid that prioritizes saturation over a quick set time. Mixing this concoction is a deliberate process, not a race. First, I measure out the 2 parts of the epoxy resin, the resin itself and the hardener, and mix them together thoroughly in a clean container. You stir it slowly for a few minutes until it's completely uniform, ensuring there are no unmixed streaks. Once the epoxy is fully blended, I slowly pour in the pure tung oil while continuing to stir. The mixture will thin out considerably, taking on the amber hue of the oil. This brew is designed to have a long open time, giving it the maximum opportunity to be absorbed by the thirsty, damaged wood before it even begins to think about hardening. With the hardening blend prepared, the next step is to get it where it needs to go, deep inside the bench top. Simply pouring it on top would not be enough, as air trapped within the wood would prevent full saturation. To overcome this, I employed a bit of shop ingenuity using a vacuum pump. I drilled a series of small holes into the rotten area, and then used a specialized vacuum chuck, sealed against the wood with weather stripping, to pull a strong vacuum. This process actively sucks the air out from the porous, decayed wood fibers, creating a powerful negative pressure that will draw the liquid in. Once the vacuum pump had run for a while, evacuating the air from the rotten section, it was time for the injection. Using a large syringe, I began slowly introducing the tung oil and resin mixture into the drilled holes. The effect was immediate and gratifying. The liquid disappeared into the wood as if being drawn by an invisible straw, pulled by the vacuum into the microscopic voids left by the decay. I continued this process, refilling the syringe and injecting the blend into different holes, watching as the dark, thirsty wood drank up the restorative fluid. The goal was to keep applying it until the wood was completely saturated and would accept no more. Once the wood was fully saturated, the waiting game began. This is not a process you can rush. The custom blend is designed for a slow, methodical cure, which is essential for its deep penetrating action. For the first few days, the surface remained wet to the touch as the mixture continued to soak deeper and the curing process slowly initiated. I monitored the bench daily, tapping on the affected area. Initially, the sound was a dull, soft thud, the sound of rotten wood, but slowly, day by day, the tone began to change. It started to sharpen, becoming brighter and more solid as the resin inside began to cross-link and polymerize. This transformation from soft to hard happens from the inside out. The epoxy resin acts like a skeleton, bonding with the compromised wood fibers and locking them into a solid matrix. The tung oil, now trapped within that matrix, cures alongside it, adding flexibility and water resistance to the newly formed composite material. It's a fascinating thing to witness. The wood that was once soft enough to push a finger into was gradually becoming as hard as stone. By the end of the first week, the surface was no longer tacky, and the tapping sound was significantly more resonant, indicating that the core was solidifying nicely. After about 2 weeks, the curing process was largely complete. The once punky corner was now incredibly dense and hard, heavier than the surrounding healthy wood. It was time to see what we had created beneath the surface. Using a freshly sharpened hand plane, I began to take thin shavings off the top. The first few passes removed the excess surface resin and the darkest, most damaged layer of wood. What was revealed underneath was breathtaking. The wood grain, which had been obscured by rot, was now beautifully defined and highlighted by the amber tint of the oil and resin blend. The formerly soft, light-colored wood was now a rich, translucent brown. As I planed the surface flat, a few small voids and deeper pockets were revealed where the rot had been most severe. These were easily addressed. I mixed up a slightly thicker batch of the resin blend, this time with less tung oil to reduce its tendency to run. I carefully filled these remaining imperfections, using a small spatula to work the mixture in and ensure it was level with the surrounding surface. After another few days of curing for these spot fills, the entire area was ready for its final surfacing. The feel of the wood was completely transformed. It was no longer a weak point, but arguably the strongest part of the entire bench. With the surface fully hardened and filled, the final step in the structural restoration was to sand everything perfectly flat and smooth. I started with a coarse grit sandpaper on a random orbit sander to level the patched areas with the original maple, then progressively moved to finer grits. The process was dusty but deeply satisfying. The stabilized wood sanded beautifully, revealing a smooth, glass-like surface where there was once crumbling decay. The transition from the original, healthy wood to the newly consolidated section was seamless to the touch, though visually distinct due to the rich, dark color of the repaired area. It looked less like a patch and more like a unique geological feature of the wood. Before calling the job done, a stress test was in order. This is the moment of truth. I took a heavy mallet and gave the repaired corner several firm, confident blows, the kind of abuse a workbench should be able to withstand. Instead of the dull, sickening thud of rotten wood, the mallet bounced off with a sharp, clear crack. There was no give, no crushing, no sign of weakness whatsoever. I even placed a block of wood over the area and gave it a few strikes with a sledgehammer. The bench didn't flinch. The once punky, fragile corner was now a rock-solid, impact-resistant monolith. The restoration hadn't just worked, it had exceeded all expectations. To protect the entire surface and unify its appearance, I applied a final flood coat of the same tung oil and resin blend, but this time with an even higher ratio of oil to resin. I wiped it on generously across the entire benchtop, old and new sections alike. The old maple drank it in, its grain darkening to a warm honey color, while the repaired section took on an even deeper, more lustrous sheen. After letting it soak in for an hour, I wiped off all the excess, leaving a beautiful, durable and water-resistant satin finish that felt incredible to the touch and would protect the bench for years to come. Looking at the finished workbench, it's hard to believe it's the same piece that was on the verge of being discarded. The comparison is dramatic. What was once a liability, a piece of crumbling, water-damaged junk, is now the centerpiece of the shop, stronger, more durable, and arguably more beautiful than ever. This process proves that restoration is often a far better path than replacement. Not only did it save a significant amount of money compared to buying a new maple bench of this quality, but it also preserved its history. Every hammer blow and saw cut on this surface will now be added to its story, a story that was almost cut short by a little bit of water.